Imagine driving alone at night on a deserted road, radio squeaking, the headlight cutting the absolute darkness. Suddenly you feel a shiver through your spine. Something is strange. You look at the rearview mirror and realize you're no longer alone, but you are sure you didn't take anyone along the way. Today, I will tell you a disturbing story, a meeting on the road that challenges all logic, a mysterious passenger that no one saw to enter. If you think you're safe inside your car, you may better think again. Rodrigo was already used to driving at dawn. As a commercial representative, he constantly traveled to small towns, and the deserted roads were part of his routine. But that night, something seemed different. The clock on the panel scored 2h37 in the morning. He drove along an almost movementless highway, surrounded by a vast darkness. The only sound was the snoring of the engine and the monotonous noise of the tires on the asphalt. The radio, which used to be his company, was static, and every attempt to tune in a station failed. The road stretched in front of him, endless, and Rodrigo felt his eyelids sway. He knew he needed a break, so he was aware of the signs, looking for a safe post or shoulder to park. That's when he saw something forward. A lone figure by the road, illuminated only by the pale glow of the headlights. He was a man, wearing a long dark coat with his hands stuck in his pockets. He had no sign asking for a ride, just remained still, immovable, as if he already knew Rodrigo would stop. Rodrigo hesitated. I didn't usually give a ride to strangers, especially at that time, but there was something unsettling in the way the man was there, as if he was waiting for him. A shiver went up his spine. Against her common sense, Rodrigo slowed down and touched the car. He opened the passenger's door and leaned over to look better. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. The man remained still for a few seconds, as if evaluating the situation. So, without saying a word, it got into the car and closed the door with a slow movement. Rodrigo swallowed hard. The smell of wet earth and a slight odor of iron filled the car. He tried to disguise the discomfort and resumed the trip. "Where are you going?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The man turned his head slowly toward him. His eyes were back, shaded by the low light of the panel. And then, with a low and dragged voice, he replied, "Just go ahead." A sharp cold took over the interior of the car. Rodrigo felt a shiver through his background, but kept his eyes on the road, trying to ignore the strange feeling that surrounded him. The trip continued in an uncomfortable silence, but after a few minutes, Rodrigo began to feel something even worse. He could not explain, but he had the clear impression that the man beside him had not gotten into the car alone. Rodrigo tried to ignore the restlessness that grew inside him. The man beside him remained motionless, staring at the road. Ahead, the silence between the two was suffocating, and the air inside the car seemed to have gotten heavier. It was then that Rodrigo noticed something for the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but for a short moment, he had the feeling that there was something there. A dark figure, a shadow sneaking into the dim light of the car. Your heart has accelerated. He looked away from the mirror and tried to concentrate on the road. It was just tired. It was that. I needed to get to the next post, but the sensation was not. And then, something cold touched his neck. It was a subtle touch, almost like a cold breeze going through the skin. But there were no open windows. Rodrigo froze. Her whole body entered alert. He looked at the rearview mirror again, now more carefully, and that's when he saw it. Yes, there was someone in the back seat. A pale figure, with empty eyes, watched him. It shouldn't be there. There was no way to be there. The car shook on the track when Rodrigo, taken by the panic, turned the steering wheel abruptly. The man by his side remained inexpressive, as if he had not noticed anything. "What is that?" Rodrigo shouted, panting, trying to keep control of the car. Finally, the man moved. He slowly turned his head toward Rodrigo and, for the first time, smiled. But it was not a common smile. There was something wrong with it. "You saw, didn't you?" said the man. in an almost fun tone. Rodrigo felt the blood freezing. He knew who was in the back seat. Rodrigo shouted, unable to prevent his voice to shake. The man only slightly leaned his head, as if he was enjoying the moment. Now you can see them too. Rodrigo did not want to look again. I couldn't, but it was impossible to avoid. His gaze was pulled to the rearview mirror one last time, and this time, there was more than one shadow back there. Pale, with empty eyes, the faces began to lean forward, leaving the darkness. Small smiles were drawing on his lips, as if they were satisfied that he finally noted them. Rodrigo released a scream and stepped on the accelerator. The car fired the deserted road, the headlights cutting the darkness in the midst of its desperate escape. He needed to get out of there. I needed to get rid of it. But then, the man's voice sounded again, low and quiet, in the middle of chaos. It's too late. And then, everything went out. Rodrigo woke up with his face pressed against the wheel, an unbearable tinnitus in the ears. The car was standing in the shoulder, the headlights still lit, illuminating the deserted road. His head throbbed, and he took a few seconds to understand what had happened. He had passed out, but how long? With a hesitant movement, he looked up at the passenger seat. Empty. The back seat, also empty. The car was locked, the doors closed, as if no one had ever entered there. The fear was still pulsating into his chest. His hands shake when he touched the wheel, trying to be convinced that it was all a nightmare caused by tiredness. But then he saw, in the rearview mirror, something that made your stomach fall. The word "thank you" was scribbled in the glowed glass of the rear window, as if someone, or something, had written inside. The despair took over Rodrigo. He got out of the car, staggering, breathing fast, his heart hammering the ribs. The cold air of dawn burned his lungs as he tried to convince himself that it was not real. But there was something even worse. When he finally found courage to look around, he realized that he was not where he should be. The road was not the same. The posts, previously spaced along the highway, were now twisted and rusty, as if they were abandoned for decades. The asphalt was cracked, taken by marteau and dust. There was no more sound, no car in the distance, no sign of life, just an absolute, overwhelming silence. Rodrigo felt a vertigo take over him. He took his cell phone with trembling hands and tried to check the location, but the device was without signal. His chest climbed and descended into despair when he noticed a final detail. The sky above him. There were no stars. There was no moon. Just an oppressive, endless darkness. And then a familiar voice whispered behind him, almost like a distant echo. "You shouldn't have stopped." Rodrigo turned his body in a reflection, but there was no one there. Only the empty road, and a long way that took nowhere. Rodrigo was never seen again. Not your car, nor any trace that he even existed on that road. And the scariest, that stretch of the highway is not on any map. Stories like this circulate between truckers and drivers traveling at dawn. Passenger reports that come out of nowhere, and roads that should not be there. So the next time you drive late at night and feel that there is someone in the back seat, don't look at the rear view mirror, because if you look, it may be that they never leave you out. Now tell me, have you been through something strange on the road? Any presence, any sensation that made you doubt your own reality? Write in the comments. I want to know your story. And if you liked the video, don't forget to leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications, so you don't lose any of the next dark reports that I bring here. We see ourselves in the next video. If you are still here,